The trap Lieutenant Kara Voss had always believed she was prepared for anything the galaxy could throw at her. But when the alien ambush came, it was faster and more brutal than anything she had ever trained for. She had been leading a small squad through the valley, their mission simple reconnaissance, yet the rocks around them exploded with plasma fire and alien warriors descended like shadows from the cliffs. Her soldiers fought back with the fury humans were known for, but the enemy had laid their trap well and soon Kara stood alone, surrounded by creatures with gray armor and sneering jaws. Their leader, a tall alien with crimson eyes, stepped forward, holding a syringe filled with a glowing green liquid. The alien hissed words in a language she could barely understand, but the meaning was clear enough. They wanted to show the galaxy how fragile humans really were, to make an example of her. Before Kara could move, they lunged and stabbed the needle into her arm. The fluid burned like fire racing through her veins. Her vision blurred and her body collapsed as if her muscles had been cut from the bone. The aliens roared with laughter, slapping each other's armored shoulders, convinced they had broken the human spirit with one clever strike. She hit the ground hard, her chest heaving as the poison spread. Her last clear memory was of the alien, commander leaning close to sneer at her face, telling his soldiers that this was the end of human arrogance, that no creature could survive the venom of their world. Then darkness swallowed her and her mind sank into a deep abyss. The aliens dragged her limp body into their camp. They threw her on the ground like discarded meat near the cages where other human prisoners were held. The captives cried out her name, but the guards silenced them with the butt of their rifles. Kara's eyes fluttered once but did not open. To the aliens, she was dead already, or at least as good as dead. They gathered around their fires that night, raising their cups of fermented drink, mocking the idea that humanity was strong. They told each other that humans were stubborn animals, loud and defiant, but at their core weak like insects who could not endure true venom. Their camp filled with celebration, with the clash of mugs and the thump of drums echoing under the alien night sky. Yet inside her still body something else was happening. The poison had not killed her. Instead, it pushed her into a heavy sleep, her heartbeat slowing but steady, her lungs pulling air with measured rhythm. Her body was fighting in silence, each cell resisting the venom with a strength born of centuries, of survival on the harsh world called Earth. What the aliens did not understand was that humanity had evolved against countless toxins, diseases, and predators. What they called certain death was for Kara's body a brutal trial, but not the end. Hours passed. The aliens forgot about her, too busy with their laughter and feasting. Kara's mind drifted through a haze of memories. She saw her mother's face from years ago, telling her never to bow to anyone. She saw the training fields where she had pushed her body until it shook, learning to crawl through mud, learning to fight hand to hand, learning to keep her will unbroken no matter the pain. She saw the faces of her squad falling one by one, in the ambush, their shouts still echoing in her ears. And through it all, a fire burned deep within her soul, a refusal to be ended by the arrogance of aliens who thought they understood humanity. At some point near dawn, her eyes opened. Her breath came deeper, her muscles slowly responding again. She was not fully awake, but she was not gone either. She heard the guards talking lazily outside the cages, bragging about how quickly humans fell, their voices dripping with overconfidence. She lay still and listened, absorbing every careless word, every detail about their patrol routes and guard rotations. Each sound fed into her mind like pieces of a puzzle. She remained quiet, letting them believe she was nothing but a corpse, while inside her fury sharpened into something cold and dangerous. By the time the second night came, Kara was stirring. Her hands clenched into fists. The poison that was supposed to destroy her had been beaten back by her body's relentless defense. She was weak but alive, her spirit untouched. The aliens had no idea that the trap they had sprung was already beginning to unravel. For in their arrogance they had forgotten the most important lesson about humanity. Humans could be knocked down, poisoned, broken, but as long as they breathed even faintly, they would rise again. And when they rose, they would not come back quietly. The alien camp slept peacefully that night, unaware that the soldier they had poisoned was about to wake fully. Kara's eyes glimmered in the darkness, a faint spark of life returning to them. She let her head fall back and closed them once more. But this time it was not the helpless sleep of a victim. It was the calm patience of a predator preparing for the right moment to strike. The awakening. The morning sun rose over the alien camp, casting long shadows across the rough stone walls and the crude metal structures that held prisoners in cages like animals. Smoke from the fires drifted lazily into the air, carrying with it the bitter smell of alien drink and roasted meat. The guards were slow to rouse from their celebration, their heads heavy with drink, their confidence making them careless. They believed their poisoned trophy was finished, that the human soldier was nothing but a husk waiting to rot. Yet beneath the quiet stillness of her body, Lieutenant Kara Voss stirred. Her eyes flickered open and the world sharpened around her. She drew in a long breath and felt her chest expand with renewed strength. The venom that had once burned her veins now felt distant, like the fading echo of a storm. Her muscles ached, but they obeyed her will. She pushed herself slowly up on one elbow, careful to keep her movement small and hidden from the eyes of the guards. She listened to the sounds around her, the shuffle of boots outside the cages, the faint buzz of alien generators powering the perimeter shields, the murmurs of prisoners whispering in despair. Every detail was valuable. Every sound was a thread she could pull later when the time to strike came. She did not speak. Not yet. The prisoners watched with wide eyes, some gasping when they saw her alive, but she raised one finger to her lips, and they understood the order. Silence was her weapon now. Her body was healing faster than she had expected. She could feel her heartbeat steady and strong, the fire of human resilience burning brighter with each passing moment. She tested her fingers, her arms, her legs, stretching them slowly against the stiffness left behind by the poison. She remembered the alien commander's sneer, the cruel way he had declared humans weak before plunging the syringe into her arm. The memory did not weaken her. It hardened her resolve. She swore to herself that when she rose fully, the alien who had dared to mock her kind would regret ever setting eyes on a human. Throughout the day, she pretended to be still, conserving her energy, drawing strength from her rest. The guards paid her no attention, believing the poison had sealed her fate. They laughed as they walked past, sometimes spitting near her body, sometimes calling her a failed predator. Kara let them believe their lies, knowing their arrogance was the cloak that hid her awakening. By nightfall, she was strong enough to sit upright. The prisoners pressed close to the bars of their cages, their whispers urgent, their hope fragile. She looked at them, her eyes steady, her voice low, but filled with command as she finally spoke. She told them to wait, to hold on, to trust her. The words were simple, but in that moment it was as if a spark of fire had been lit inside their broken hearts. For the first time since capture, they felt that survival was possible, that humanity's spirit had not been crushed. Kara's gaze drifted across the camp, studying everything. She saw the patrol routes of the guards, the towers where sentries dozed instead of watching, the piles of alien weapons stacked carelessly near the armory. She memorized the rhythm of the camp, the moments of noise and the moments of silence. She thought back to her training, the countless hours spent learning to analyze battlefields, to turn weakness into advantage. Every corner of the alien camp became a piece on a board, every alien soldier a pawn waiting to fall. When the moon rose high and the camp grew quieter, she made her first test. She pressed her hand against the cage door that held her, feeling the crude lock. It was heavy but not impossible. She pulled a pin from her uniform sleeve, a small piece of metal most would ignore. But for a soldier it was a tool, a chance. With patient hands, she worked the pin into the lock, twisting carefully until she felt the click of release. The door creaked softly as it opened, the sound lost in the chorus of snoring guards. She stepped out into the cool night air, her body tense but alive, her senses sharpened. Each breath she took filled her with more energy, more focus. She crouched low, moving silently across the shadows, testing her balance, her strength. The aliens had left her weapons behind near the fires. She did not rush to them yet. She wanted to know if her body could still fight barehanded. She approached the nearest guard, a hulking creature dozing against the wall, and with one swift movement, she wrapped her arm around his throat and pulled him into the darkness. He struggled, for only a few moments before falling limp. She laid him down gently, her lips pressing into a cold line of determination. She was ready. Kara returned to her cage and closed the door, leaving no sign of her freedom. She would wait until the perfect time to unleash herself fully upon the camp. For now she needed to build her strength and gather her fury. She sat back against the bars, the faintest smile touching her lips as she heard the guards laughing in the distance, completely unaware that their victim was already awake and preparing. That night she did not sleep. She planned. She thought of the weapons she would claim, the paths she would take, the prisoners she would free, and the commander whose crimson eyes she would close forever. She knew the storm was coming and she was its heart. The poison they had given her had not ended her life. It had sharpened her will. It had transformed her into something the aliens would never forget. The alien camp lay peaceful, unaware of the fire building in its shadows. Kara sat in silence, her body still but her mind alive with strategy. When dawn came again, the aliens would begin to learn the mistake they had made. The reckoning begins. The sky above the alien camp shifted from night into a gray dawn, and the creatures stirred from their sleep with slow movements and heavy limbs. They laughed about the feast of the previous night and congratulated themselves on the defeat of the human soldier, who they believed lay dead in her cage. They walked past, Kara without a second glance, their arrogance blinding them to the truth. She kept her eyes closed and her body limp until they moved away, her mind sharp and waiting for the moment to begin. When the camp settled into its rhythm, she rose quietly, stretching her muscles under the cover of shadows. She slid the pin into the lock again and eased the cage door open with a careful hand. This time she did not return to her prison. She stepped into the open camp with the steady patience of a predator testing the air. The guards at the perimeter stood in pairs, but they faced outward, not inward, convinced the danger came from the wilderness and not from within their own walls. Kara crouched low and moved like a shadow behind the tents. Her eyes caught the glint of steel where alien blades and rifles were piled near the fires. She chose her path with care, every footstep placed with silence, every breath controlled. She reached the armory stack and searched quickly with her hands until she felt the familiar weight of a human combat knife among the alien tools. The sight of it filled her with calm strength. She gripped it tight and turned back toward the nearest patrol. Two aliens walked side by side, their voices careless as they spoke of spoils and glory. Kara waited until they passed close to her hiding place, and then struck with precision. One fell with a swift cut to the throat, the other turned too late as her blade pierced deep into his chest. She dragged both bodies into the shadows and covered them with canvas. The camp remained loud and careless, the disappearance unnoticed. Her next step was to gather intelligence. She climbed silently onto the roof of a low structure and looked out across the camp. She counted the guards, marked the routes, and measured the distance to the power generators at the far end. If she could disable the shields, the camp would be vulnerable to attack from outside, and if she could sow chaos within the walls, the prisoners might be freed to rise alongside her. She memorized everything, storing it in her mind like a map. As the day passed, she continued her quiet work. She struck from shadows and left no sound behind. A lone guard near the water barrels vanished into the dust. Another near the cages collapsed with a broken neck, and each time she cleaned the ground of evidence. The prisoners began to notice the change, the whispers passing among them that the poisoned soldier was not only alive, but moving against their captors. Their hope grew with every muffled cry cut short in the night, every missing guard at morning roll. The aliens began to sense something was wrong, though they could not explain it. Patrols returned with fewer men than before, and weapons went missing from the racks. They blamed the wilderness at first, speaking of predators outside the walls, but fear crept into their eyes when tracks inside the camp showed the marks of human boots. The commander cursed his soldiers and demanded vigilance, his crimson eyes flashing with anger. But still he laughed at the idea of a poisoned human rising again. To him it was impossible, but his laughter no longer carried the same certainty. Kara felt her strength return with every action. The poison was now only a memory, a wound that had forged her body into harder steel. She moved with confidence and precision, Each strike another reminder that humans did not break as easily as the galaxy believed. She thought of her fallen squad, their voices urging her onward, their sacrifice demanding justice. She carried their memory like armor around her heart, and with each alien she cut down she whispered their names in silence. By the time the second night came, she had eliminated nearly a dozen guards without a single alarm raised. The camp felt uneasy, the air heavy with tension. Fires burned lower, conversations turned to whispers, and the drums of celebration were gone. The prisoners clutched the bars of their cages and watched her with awe, their hope now transformed into certainty that freedom was coming. Kara looked at them once and nodded, her face calm but her eyes burning with purpose. She returned to her hiding place above the cages and rested her back against the wood, her knife still in her hand, her thoughts cold and sharp. She knew that the reckoning had only begun. The aliens had taken her strength for weakness, had poisoned her and celebrated over what they thought was her corpse. Now their camp was unraveling piece by piece, their numbers thinning, their courage fading. She had not yet shown them the full weight of her fury, but soon she would. And when that storm finally broke upon them, no wall or weapon would save them from the wrath of the soldier they had dared to poison. The night deepened, the stars spread, wide above, and Kara closed her eyes not in weakness but in preparation. Tomorrow the true assault would begin. Fear spreads. The alien camp that once rang with laughter now felt heavy with unease as the morning broke and the guards assembled for their usual roll call, only to find gaps in their lines. Soldiers who should have been standing tall were missing. Weapons had vanished from the racks, and the commander's eyes glowed with a fury that silenced even the boldest among them. He barked orders, demanded answers, and accused his warriors of negligence. Still, none dared to suggest the unthinkable truth that the human they had poisoned might be the ghost haunting their nights. They whispered instead about predators from the wilderness or rival clans slipping into their camp, but deep down every one of them felt the cold grip of doubt. Kara watched them from the shadows with calm patience. She moved silently between the structures, her body strong now, her breathing steady. She had fed herself from their stores of food, drunk their water, and claimed their weapons. With every passing hour, she was less a prisoner and more a hunter. The prisoners in the cages followed her with their eyes, their hope now growing into open anticipation. Some pressed their hands together in silent prayer. Others mouthed encouragement, but all remained quiet as she had commanded. That day she chose not to strike quickly. She let the fear grow, let the aliens feel the tension stretch tight in their minds. She sabotaged small things at first, cutting power lines to the lamps that lit the camp, loosening the straps of their armored gear, pouring sand into the barrels of their rifles. Each act seemed small, but when the soldiers discovered their failures, the frustration mounted. A guard pulled his trigger and the weapon jammed. Another tried to raise a light and found only darkness. They cursed, they argued, they looked over their shoulders more than they looked outward. The confidence that had filled them after the ambush was gone, replaced by the slow creep of fear that comes when an enemy is unseen and unknown. By nightfall, Kara escalated her war. She struck swiftly at the edges of the camp, silent as shadow. A sentry fell without a sound, his body hidden beneath a collapsed tent. Another vanished near the water troughs, his rifle taken, his throat slit. The prisoners watched the guards stumble in panic, their eyes wide with the knowledge that justice was unfolding before them. They whispered her name in reverence, the poisoned soldier who had become their savior. The alien commander at last admitted what his warriors feared to say. He stood before them, his crimson eyes blazing, and declared that the human lived. He called her a beast, a cursed predator that refused to die, and he swore to crush her with his own hands. But even as he spoke, the soldiers shifted uneasily. Their faith in his words cracked. They remembered the celebration after her poisoning, the laughter, the toasts to their victory. They remembered how certain he had been that the venom would end her. Now she was walking among them, taking their lives, turning their strength into weakness. Their commander's rage did little to silence the gnawing terror that spread like fire through their ranks. Kara listened to his speech from the shadows and marked his face. She promised herself that when the time came, he would be the last to fall, so that he could witness the ruin of his camp, the failure of his arrogance, and the truth of human defiance. She turned her attention back to the cages where the prisoners waited, their eyes bright with desperate hope. She crouched near the bars and whispered that soon the chains would be broken, that they must be ready to fight when she gave the signal, their faces lit with determination, their despair replaced by resolve. Through the next hours she worked like a storm in silence. She cut through the shield generators with scavenged tools, sparks flying as the barriers around the camp flickered, and died. She laid traps in the paths between the tents, sharp wires strung low, pits covered with sand. She used the alien weapons she had gathered, setting them in hidden places ready to fire when needed. Each move was a step in the larger dance. Each, strike another beat in the growing song of fear that echoed through the camp. By the second night, the aliens were no longer celebrating. Fires burned low, guards clustered in groups too afraid to patrol alone, and their commander paced with restless fury. They spoke of the human now as if she were a phantom, a curse, a thing that could not be killed. Their voices shook, their hands trembled on their weapons, and every shadow seemed to them a place where death waited. Kara rested near the cages, her knife in hand, her body ready. She knew the time for patience was ending. She had sown fear and broken their confidence. Now the storm would come, swift and merciless. She looked once at the prisoners and gave a single nod, a promise that tomorrow, the camp would no longer belong to the aliens. Tomorrow it would burn. The night stretched long and silent, broken only by the whispers of frightened guards and the steady breath of a human soldier who had once been poisoned but now stood stronger than ever. The reckoning was no longer a secret shadow. It was rising like a wave, and soon it would crash upon the camp with unstoppable force. The storm. The alien camp woke to chaos before the sun had even risen. The shield that had once glowed around their perimeter had flickered and died during the night, leaving only the raw walls of stone and wood. Patrols that should have returned never came back. The air carried the scent of oil and smoke from the generators Kara had sabotaged, and the silence that stretched through the camp was filled with the weight of fear. The commander shouted for order, his voice ringing across the camp, but his words did little to steady the trembling of his warriors. They gathered in clusters with their rifles clutched tight, eyes darting into the shadows, waiting for the enemy they could not see. Kara crouched in the darkness behind the cages, her knife at her belt and a stolen plasma rifle in her hands. Her heart beat steady, her breath controlled. She had studied every corner of this camp, every blind spot and weakness, and now the time had come to strike without hesitation. She looked at the prisoners once more and gave them the faintest nod. They understood. When the storm broke, they would rise with her. She began with fire. Crawling to the stacks of fuel barrels near the armory, she lit the crude torch she had fashioned and hurled it against the containers. The explosion ripped through the dawn, a roar of flame and shrapnel that shook the ground. Aliens screamed and dove for cover as the blaze tore upward, lighting the camp with violent brightness. In that chaos, Kara opened fire, her plasma rifle spitting bolts into the first squad that ran toward the fire. 2 fell instantly, another staggered, and the rest scattered in panic. She moved swiftly, never staying in one place, using the smoke and flames as her shield. The aliens shouted orders to regroup, but each command was drowned in the confusion of explosions and gunfire. Kara moved like a shadow among them, striking from unexpected angles, vanishing before they could retaliate. A guard who ran toward the cages dropped with his throat cut. Another fell into one of the pits she had prepared, his scream ending in silence. Everywhere she moved, the aliens felt her presence, and with each moment their fear grew deeper. The prisoners gripped the bars of their cages, their eyes wide, their hearts pounding with the realization that the impossible was happening. Before them, the woman who had been poisoned, who had lain motionless only days ago, was tearing through the camp like a storm made flesh. Some of them began to shout encouragement, their voices rising above the roar of fire, giving Kara the chorus of human strength she carried with her into every strike. The commander rallied his best warriors at the center of the camp. He barked orders, his crimson eyes blazing, his voice filled with rage. He demanded that they hold their lines, that they remember their strength. But even as he spoke, Kara struck again, grenades she had scavenged from their stores flying into their midst. The blasts tore through their formation, scattering bodies and weapons. The commander survived, roaring in fury, but the fire of doubt burned even brighter in his soldiers' hearts. Kara did not let them rest. She moved straight to the cages, pulling at the locks with her pin until they gave way. The prisoners burst free, some stumbling with weakness, others grabbing fallen weapons with desperate hands. Kara looked at them, her face fierce and determined, and shouted for them to fight. Their voices answered her, raw with fury and hunger for freedom. They surged into the camp alongside her, turning the chaos into full rebellion. The aliens were unprepared for such defiance. They had thought the humans broken, their spirits crushed, but now they were faced with a fire they could not contain. The prisoners fought with the strength of those who had nothing left to lose. They tackled guards, wrestled rifles from their hands, and struck with fists and stones when weapons failed them. Kara led from the front, her blade flashing, her rifle firing, her body moving with a relentless rhythm that inspired all who followed. The camp became a battlefield of smoke, fire, and screams. Aliens fell one after another, their formations shattered, their discipline gone. Kara pressed forward, her mind focused on the final goal. She would not stop until the commander himself was broken. Each step she took was a message to the galaxy, that humans did not die quietly, that no poison, no prison, no enemy could strip them of their will to fight. By the time the sun climbed fully over the horizon, the camp was a ruin of burning structures and broken bodies. The aliens who survived huddled together in the center, their weapons shaking in their hands, their eyes wide with terror. Kara stood before them with the prisoners at her back, her chest heaving, her blade dripping with blood. She raised her rifle and fired into the air, the sound echoing like thunder, and the survivors cowered. The commander stepped forward, his crimson eyes filled with rage and disbelief, and pointed his blade at her. The storm had reached its heart. The true battle was about to begin. The last stand. The commander stepped into the open with his blade drawn, his tall armored frame gleaming in the rising sun. Around him the wreckage of the camp burned, the smoke curling into the air while the cries of the dying echoed through the ruins. His soldiers looked to him with desperate eyes, their courage gone, their weapons shaking. Yet he tried to summon authority with the force of his voice. He roared at them to fight, to stand, to crush the human who had defied their poison, but the weight of fear pressed them down and none moved forward. Kara walked out from the smoke, her face streaked with soot and blood, her knife in one hand, and her rifle in the other. Her steps were steady, her body battered but unbroken, her eyes locked on the commander. Behind her, the freed prisoners formed a rough line, some bleeding, some limping, yet all holding stolen weapons and waiting for her command. In that moment she looked less like a poisoned victim and more like a storm-given flesh, the embodiment of the resilience her people carried in their blood. The commander sneered, his crimson eyes narrowing. He pointed his blade toward her and spat words in his harsh tongue, swearing that he would end the legend before it spread. Kara did not answer with words. She dropped the empty rifle at her side, raised her combat knife, and stepped forward with calm determination. The prisoners parted to let her pass, their voices hushed, their hope resting on her shoulders. The clash came sudden and fierce. The commander lunged with his long blade, the strike fueled by strength and rage, but Kara moved with the precision of training and survival. She dodged, closing the distance, slashing across his armor. Sparks flew, but the blade did not pierce deep. He swung again and again, each blow powerful enough to crush bone if it landed, yet Kara slipped past them with the agility of a predator. Her knife struck again, cutting flesh beneath the armor, drawing the first real blood. The commander roared in fury and the sound shook his soldiers, but Kara pressed on, refusing to yield an inch. Around them the battle still raged in fragments. Prisoners fought the remnants of guards, struggling in hand-to-hand combat, their cries mixing with the clash of steel and the crack of rifles. But all eyes returned again and again to the duel at the center, where human and alien clashed in a fight that carried the weight of more than one camp. It was a battle of pride, of defiance, of survival. The commander struck with crushing power, driving Kara back against the wreckage of a burning tent. His blade cut across her side and blood spilled hot, but she did not fall. She gritted her teeth, remembered the faces of her fallen squad, and surged forward with renewed strength. She locked her arm around his, twisted, and drove her knife into the joint of his armor. The commander howled as the blade sank deep, his weapon clattering to the ground. Kara ripped her knife free and pressed the attack, striking again and again until the giant stumbled backward. He tried to rally, tried to roar defiance, but his voice cracked under the pain. Kara circled him, her chest heaving, her body shaking, but her will stronger than steel. She saw fear in his crimson eyes, the first flicker of doubt, and she knew the moment was hers. With a cry that carried the weight of every human life lost in the ambush, she lunged and drove her blade straight into his chest. His roar turned to a gurgle, his knees buckled, and the great commander collapsed to the ground. The camp fell silent for a heartbeat. The aliens stared in disbelief as their leader lay dying in the dirt. Kara stood above him, her body trembling from wounds and exhaustion, yet her eyes still burned with fire. She raised her bloodied knife high and shouted one word that carried across the camp, a cry of victory that shattered the last of the enemy's courage. The remaining aliens broke. Some dropped their weapons and fled. Others fell to their knees in surrender, but none dared to face her. The prisoners surged forward, capturing those who remained, their cries of triumph echoing through the smoke. Kara stood in the center of it all, swaying on her feet, her wounds bleeding but her spirit unyielding. She looked down at the commander one final time. His crimson eyes, once filled with arrogance, now stared lifeless into the dirt. She had kept her promise. He had been the last to fall, and he had witnessed the ruin of his camp and the truth of human defiance. The battle was over, but the war within her still burned. She pressed a hand against her wound, steadied her breath, and lifted her head high. The prisoners gathered around her, their voices rising in cheers, their faith in humanity restored. Kara gave them a nod of gratitude, but her mind was already on the message that would soon spread across the stars. Humans were not weak, not fragile, not broken by poison. They were survivors, and when threatened, they became unstoppable. Ashes of the camp smoke curled into the sky above the ruined alien camp, carrying with it the bitter smell of burned fuel and blood. The fires crackled over broken tents and shattered walls, sending sparks into the morning air. The ground was littered with fallen bodies, alien weapons, and fragments of armor. The once proud war camp now stood as nothing more than a graveyard, a silent testimony to the mistake its inhabitants had made. In the center of it all stood Lieutenant Kara Voss, her shoulders heavy with exhaustion, her body wounded but her spirit shining like tempered steel. The prisoners surrounded her, no longer prisoners but freed men and women, their eyes bright with awe and gratitude. They whispered her name, some with trembling voices, others with fierce pride, calling her the soldier who rose from poison, the one who had turned despair into victory. Many had believed death was certain when they were dragged into the cages, yet now they breathed free air again, their hearts beating with a new fire. Kara looked at them and felt both pride and sorrow. Pride that they had stood with her when the storm broke, sorrow for those who had not lived to see this dawn. She ordered the survivors to gather supplies and tend to the wounded. Weapons were collected from the fallen, food and water were shared, and the flames of the camp were controlled so they would not spread into the valley. Even in ruin, discipline remained, for she knew their fight was not only about survival, but also about showing the galaxy that humans endured, that humans fought back, that humans did not break. The aliens who surrendered were bound and placed under guard. Some cried out for mercy, others hung their heads in shame, but none dared to meet Kara's gaze. They had laughed when she collapsed, celebrated when they thought she was gone, and now they trembled before the same soldier who had risen stronger than their poison. She said nothing to them, for her silence was heavier than any words. They would carry the memory of this defeat back to their people, and that memory would grow like fire. As the sun rose higher, Kara found a comms device among the wreckage of the command tent. She activated it, the static crackling in her ear before a human voice came through. She reported her status in a calm, steady tone, as if she were giving an ordinary field update. Camp neutralized, prisoners freed, enemy commander eliminated. Her voice carried no boast, no triumph, only the steady professionalism of a soldier who had done her duty. Yet those who heard her words on the other end of the line felt the weight behind them. They knew what it meant that one poisoned human had brought ruin to an entire camp of enemies. The freed soldiers and civilians gathered around her, and for the first time since the ambush, Kara allowed herself a long breath. She looked at the sky and thought of her fallen squad, their faces etched in her mind. She whispered their names under her breath, a quiet promise that their sacrifice had not been in vain. The victory was not hers alone. It belonged to every human who refused to yield, every soul who carried the fire of survival in their blood. When the relief ships arrived later that day, the sight that greeted them was unforgettable. A camp of ashes and silence, a handful of aliens in chains, and one human soldier standing at the center with survivors gathered around her like a shield. The story spread faster than light. Across the galaxy, whispers turned to shouts, and soon every corner knew the tale of the poisoned soldier who had closed her eyes in sleep, only to rise and wipe an enemy force from existence. The alien empires that had once mocked humanity listened now with uneasy hearts. They had called humans fragile, had called Earth's people weak, but the truth had been written in blood and fire. Humanity was not fragile. Humanity was not weak. When struck down, they rose. When poisoned, they endured. When caged, they broke, free. And when mocked, they answered with fury that no army could contain. Kara stood on the deck of the relief ship as it lifted away from the valley. She looked down at the smoking ruins of the camp one final time, her hand resting on the railing, her eyes calm. She felt no joy in the destruction, only the certainty that it had been necessary, that it was the price of survival, the price of respect. The prisoners stood with her, their voices low as they spoke of rebuilding, of returning home, of carrying this story forward. She let them speak, knowing their words would carry across generations. The stars stretched before her as the ship rose higher, endless and cold, but to her they no longer seemed so distant. She had seen the truth of her people in the darkest hours. She had felt it in her blood when the poison tried to claim her, in her heart when the commander's blade cut her, in her spirit when she refused to fall. Humanity was not simply surviving in the galaxy. Humanity was proving every day that they belonged, that they could endure what others could not, that they would stand tall where others fell. And so the tale of Kara Voss would live on, a warning and a legend. To some she was the soldier who rose from poison, to others the storm that burned a camp to ash, but to all she was proof of what it meant to be human. Humanity's shadow. The battlefield was quiet now except for the hiss of dying flames and the crack of smoldering wood. The alien camp that once echoed with laughter and arrogance was nothing but ruins. Kara Voss walked through the wreckage with slow steps, her body aching from wounds but her spirit carrying the unshakable calm of victory. Around her the freed, humans worked to tend the injured, to gather supplies, to bury their fallen. The sky above was clear and wide, sunlight breaking through the smoke as if the universe itself bore witness to what had been written here. The aliens who survived knelt, in chains, their heads bowed, their eyes haunted. They had believed the poison of their world was unstoppable, that a single injection could end human defiance. Now they saw with their own eyes the truth they had refused to believe. The poison had been nothing but a spark that lit a fire inside. The soldier they thought finished. She had risen from sleep not as prey but as hunter, and she had turned their triumph into ash. Kara stood still for a long moment and let the silence settle. She thought of her squad, their faces in the dust, their blood on the stones of the valley. She thought of the prisoners who had fought at her side, ordinary men and women who had found courage when there was no other choice. She thought of Earth, far away across the stars, where countless others lived unaware that her battle here would echo into their future. She did not smile, for war left no room for joy, but she felt the steady pulse of pride deep in her chest. When the relief ships came down, their engines roaring as they settled onto the broken ground, the survivors lifted their heads. Human soldiers poured out, shocked at the sight before them. The wreckage of an enemy stronghold laid low by one poisoned warrior and a band of freed captives. They saluted Kara as they approached, and though she tried to wave it away, they would not lower their hands. They knew they were not honoring only her but the truth she represented. Humanity endured. Humanity fought. Humanity refused to bow. Reports spread faster than light across the channels of the galaxy. The story of the poisoned soldier became more than a tale of survival. It became a warning. No alien empire would forget the image of one woman who closed her eyes in sleep and then awoke to erase an entire camp. Whispers turned into legends, legends into fear, and fear into respect. The crimson-eyed commander's death became the symbol of what happened when arrogance met human will. Kara boarded the relief ship last, her knife still at her side, her eyes steady. She looked once more at the valley below, at the ashes that marked the end of her trial. She whispered her squad's names, a final farewell carried on the wind. Then she turned and walked up the ramp, her steps strong despite the pain in her body. The ship lifted off, carrying her and the freed survivors toward the stars, leaving behind the ruins that would forever tell the story. In that silence above the burning ground, the message was clear. Humans could be poisoned, hunted, mocked, caged, but they would always rise, they would always endure. And when they rose, they would not return as victims. They would return as storms. The end.